Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I'm so thrilled you're here today because, honestly, we're looking at something just truly mind-bending. We're going to explore how our own human bias fundamentally distorts our view of the natural world. And we're going all the way from the giant animals we can easily see right down to the microscopic organisms we literally can't. So let's just dive right in and tackle our first macro-level mystery. So do animals actually understand death? It's a pretty heavy question, isn't it? Like, when we see animals in the wild standing over a fallen companion, are they actually mourning in some deep philosophical sense? Or are they just standing around wondering why their friend suddenly stopped moving and isn't participating in the herd anymore? Well, to figure that out, we kind of have to look in the mirror first. Look, let's just be honest with ourselves here. We humans have a totally unhealthy obsession with mortality. We write dramatic songs about it, we literally invent ghosts, we argue endlessly about the afterlife, and, we love to stare dramatically out the window when it's raining. We are just hyper aware of our own mortality, and because of that, we tend to project this obsession onto absolutely everything else in the animal kingdom. All right, let's get into section 1, biology dressed as emotion. Which brings us to our first major concept. Let's really look at this idea of animal grief and break down some of our favorite myths. Like, when crows gather super loudly around a dead companion, we immediately assume they're holding a tiny bird memorial service. But scientists actually tested this using realistic dead crow models. And the reality? It's not a funeral at all. It's basically a crime scene investigation. The crows are observing the area, looking for predators, and doing a detailed threat assessment so they can protect themselves later. And what about elephants nudging their dead calves? It looks incredibly emotional, but scientists note they might simply be responding to a body that still carries a very familiar, important smell. And then there are ants carrying away their dead. Are they mourning a fallen comrade? Well, no, not quite. See, ants are responding entirely to chemistry. When an ant dies, these very specific chemicals start to build up on its body, which signals to all the others that it's time to carry the corpse away. Researchers actually went and tested this by painting those exact death chemicals onto perfectly healthy living ants. And the result? The colony immediately dragged those very much alive, but definitely very confused, ants straight to the corpse pile. I mean, imagine getting evicted just because someone sprayed you with the wrong perfume. It's wild. But evolution just built an automatic response. It really doesn't require any complex reflection. So what this all boils down to is a little something called projection. It's our uniquely human tendency to assume animals experience complex abstract concepts, like guilt or grief, exactly the way we do. And this projection actually totally blinds us to biological reality. Evolution has produced these incredibly sophisticated behaviors in animals that help them survive and adapt, but those behaviors absolutely do not require them to understand abstract concepts like mortality. Okay, moving right along to section 2, the invisible microbial world. Now, let's totally shift gears and do a macro to micro pivot. We're leaving those big visible actors of life and death behind and zooming way in to look at the invisible stagehands running the entire show, the microbes. And microbes aren't just some obscure textbook science. They're literally sitting on your kitchen counter right now. A ton of our absolute favorite foods are the direct result of controlled spoilage by friendly bacteria. That fluffy bread you love, that is all thanks to yeast gorging on sugary starch and burping out carbon dioxide. The complex, smooth taste of chocolate, that relies entirely on fungi mellowing out bitter chemicals. Salami is made safe to eat by salt-tolerant microbes that just outcompete all the dangerous pathogens. And that rich, stinky blue cheese? Okay, get this. That is quite literally powered by the exact same bacteria that causes human foot odor. Yum, right? And if you thought that was wild, just look at the dirt beneath our feet. Right now, as we speak, there is an epic biological civil war raging underground between two types of mushrooms. On one side, we've got the Death Eaters. These are fungi that feed on dead, decomposing matter and just hoard vital nitrogen. On the other side, we have the sapsuckers. These fungi have struck an alliance with living trees, basically trading their vast underground network for sweet tree sap. Now, sapsuckers are the good guys for us humans, because forests dominated by them are actually 20% better at removing planet-warming carbon from the air. But inadvertently, our human pollution and massive nitrogen fertilizers are supercharging those Death Eaters, tipping the scales of this invisible war entirely. Which leads us to section 3, microbes shaping our planet. Because it's not just a battle over dirt, you guys. These invisible little organisms, they don't just make our cheese or fight over tree roots. They actively shape the climate, the weather, and the survival of the entire Earth. Think about this. 3 billion years ago, the Earth was this hot, completely oxygen-free zone. Then, cyanobacteria changed the game by inventing photosynthesis. They accidentally flooded the atmosphere with oxygen, which was actually a toxic gas to almost everything alive at the time, including themselves. But they adapted, evolving aerobic respiration just to survive. Then, over 1 billion years ago, they finally got outcompeted by algae and pushed into the shadows. But fast forward to the present day. Our carbon emissions and fertilizer runoff are warming the waters and feeding these ancient microbes, completely fueling their return. So the very creatures that gave us the oxygen we breathe are now forming toxic, sludgy mats and creating massive dead zones in our oceans. Oh, and microbes even control the sky above us. 1 billion. That is the absolutely staggering number of mushroom spores floating above every single square meter of Earth's surface right now. When these microscopic spores drift high up into the atmosphere, they don't just float around uselessly. No, they literally provide the biological scaffolding for water to condense onto, seeding rain droplets and ice crystals. Fungi are actively building the clouds that water our planet. And if we go deep into the ocean, microbes have been quietly acting as basically Earth's premier historians. There are these tiny, brainless, single-celled creatures called forams, and they build their microscopic shells using oxygen straight from seawater. But here is the brilliant trick. They use both regular and heavy oxygen. Now, during colder global climates, the lighter regular oxygen evaporates and gets trapped in massive ice sheets, which totally changes the ratio of the oxygen left behind in the ocean. So as forams build their shells, they lock in that exact ratio. By drilling into ancient ocean sediment, scientists can read these shells like a thermometer, giving us this immaculate, continuous archive of global temperatures that spans hundreds of millions of years. Okay, get ready for a massive wait what moment, because there's this paradox happening right now on the ocean floor. If a wooden ship sinks in warm, shallow water, wood-chomping worms are going to devour it in as little as 2 years. But a metal ship, that will rust slowly and last far longer. However, if you go to the deep, freezing oxygen-poor waters, those rules completely flip. Ancient 2,400-year-old Greek wooden ships are sitting down there perfectly preserved just because the wood-eating worms can't survive the cold. But the Titanic, a massive steel behemoth, it sank right into the territory of these weird iron-eating microbes. These luxury metal-craving bacteria are quite literally eating the ship alive, and experts estimate they're going to completely consume the Titanic by the year 2050.
No way, right?
All right, that brings us to Section 4, Limits of Human Observation. So we've just seen how mind-blowing this microscopic world is, right? But that actually leads us to a pretty harsh realization, because just like our human bias causes us to completely misunderstand animal grief, our human-made tools causes us to deeply misunderstand microbial life. Think about it. The cornerstone of microbiology is the petri dish, that little flat container filled with sterile nutritional jello. It's incredibly convenient for human scientists. But here's the kicker. Only about 2% of bacterial species, the really easy-to-please ones like E. coli, will actually grow in them. A staggering 98% of the bacteria on Earth flat out refuse to grow in a petri dish. Because out in the wild, the reality is just vastly different. Bacteria have these hyper-specific, absolutely wild needs that flat jello just can never, ever replicate. Some marine bacteria live in sediment, where they literally form a vertical conga line. They breathe at the top, they eat at the bottom, and they're literally exchanging electricity between themselves. Others will only thrive inside the light-producing organs of these adorable little bobtail squids, helping the squid camouflage itself from predators. And then you have parasitic bacteria, like the kind that causes syphilis, which demand a constant, endless supply of fresh nutrients from living host cells. A sterile little dish just doesn't cut it. There's this fantastic quote from a microbiologist in our source material who put it so perfectly and honestly, pretty bluntly. They said, "You wouldn't build an aquarium, throw a monkey in it, and be surprised that it isn't happy." And it's exactly the same logic here. When we force complex nature into our overly simplified human-designed boxes, we miss the vast majority of what is actually happening. Our macro logic just totally fails the micro world. So, we kind of find ourselves right back where we started, don't we? But hopefully with a much, much wider perspective. Whether we're projecting our own emotional baggage onto a crow that's just trying to investigate a threat, or whether we're trying to force a complex electricity-sharing microbe to live on a flat plate of gelatin, our human-centric view is constantly getting in the way of biological reality. To truly understand the world, from those allegedly grieving elephants all the way down to the metal-eating microbes erasing the Titanic, Isn't it time we finally stepped back, took a breath, and stopped looking at the natural world purely through a human lens? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning everything, and I'll see you next time.